So let's talk about nested for loops in Matlab. And idea of a nested for loop, well, it's really just a generalization of ordinary for loop. So for an ordinary for loop, you have a for loop, and then starts with a for, finishes with the word end, and after that you do everything that's inside between the for and the end. Here it's the exact same, it's just there happens to be another for loop in between those. And so this part here, that's what's called the inner for loop. And we're going to do this 2 times, once for I equals 1, once for I equals 2. And this question that I've written here, list every value that A takes in order. That's one of my favorite types of questions to ask on exams or on quizzes. So here's the type of answer I would want for that. So we start with I equals 1. Then we go to j equals 1. And then a11 is equal to 1 plus 2, so that equals 3. And so the final answer I would want, or not the final answer, but the first value of a that you should write down should be a equals 3. And you could write it in square brackets if you want to indicate that it's eventually going to be a matrix, but I don't think Matlab really differentiates between those. And so what changes next? Well, we're at I equals 1, and now we're working our way through this inner for loop. So we're still at I equals 1, and next we're at j equals 2. So we're at a1 comma 2 equals 1 plus 4, so equals 5. And then a very common mistake would be to write a equals 5 here. And if you do that, then I can tell that you did the math correctly, but you didn't correctly answer my question, because when I have a defined this way, a defined as 3, and then I write a1, 2 equals 5, that doesn't delete this old value of 3. It says in the first row, second column, make it equal to 5. So now it definitely has to be a vector or a matrix. So first position 3, second position 5. Okay, and similarly, next we have j equals 3, and we're going to have a equals 3, 5, 7. So these would be the first 3 values, and we've just completed our first trip through the inner for loop. So so I equals 1, j equals 3. Then we got this 7 here. Next, we're at I equals 2, and we start back over. So now we do all this stuff again, starting from scratch. So j is equal to 1. And then we have a 2 comma 1 equals 2 plus 2 equals 4. So the next value that a takes is we have 3, 5, 7. And then in row 2, column 1, we have a 4. And so I'd say this is not a big mistake, but it's some Matlab mistake as far as not understanding how Matlab treats these objects. It would be correct, actually, if we were in Mathematica, but for Matlab, it's not correct. So you're not allowed to have these blank spaces in this matrix. You need to fill them in with something. And Matlab, it uses the default value of 0. So I'm going to fill these in with zeros. Okay, and then so now we're moving our way through the inner for loop a second time. And let me just write out what we get. So one way to think about it is when I goes up by 1, that's like going from one row to the next row. Then I comma j goes up by 1. So that's why this 5 became a 6, because I equals 1 became I equals 2, but j stayed the same. J was 2. And then what's the last value going to be for I equals 2, j equals 3? We have 3, 5, 7, 4, 6, 8. So that doesn't totally finish what we're going to say about for loops. Next, I'm going to change this code just very slightly. I'm just going to change a single letter in this code, and then we're going to see how that affects the answer that I get here at the bottom. Here's the exact same question and the exact same nested for loops, except for this one difference where I used to have j from 1 to 3. Now I have j from I to 3. And so the inner for loop, anything here can depend on I. This part up here, that can't depend on j, because j doesn't exist until I get to this inner for loop. So here, when I go through this inner for loop the first time with I equals 1, it's the exact same as in the previous video. So I still have these same first 3 values of a. Okay, and I got them for the same reasons, thinking about I equals 1, j equals 1, I equals 1, j equals 2, and so on. But now the second time through the for loop, something different happens. So I have I equals 2. And now j cannot equal 1. J starts at 2, starts at whatever I is. So I skipped j equals 1, and I go straight to j equals 2. And now I have a22 equals 2 plus 4 equals 6. And this is what a was before I executed this command in MATLAB. So what's a going to be next? So a is going to be 3, 5, 7, and then 6. Okay, and then what? And then fill in with these default values of 0. What comes next? I is still 2. We're still on our second iteration through this inner for loop. And j equals 3. And a23 equals 8. And so the final value that a takes is going to be 3, 5, 7 in the top row and 0, 6, 8 in the bottom row. And I wanted to go through this example because this is one of the most common types of phrasing that I use for asking these sorts of questions, whether it's on a worksheet or on an exam. And so the answer I would want would be this whole thing here on the bottom. So just writing like 3, 5, 7, that would not be enough. Or just writing this final matrix, that would not be enough. I really want all 5 of these values in order, all 5 of these values of a in order.